Good evening, everyone. On the day when the economic survey was released to the nation, it's a great pleasure to be here, and it's a great pleasure to be joined by the Chief Economic Advisor to the government, Anantha, Nageswaran. Dr. Nageswaran, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for talking to us. Now, I know it's always challenging to try and get you to condense a thick document like the economic survey into a set of brief headlines, but I'm going to ask you to try anyway. What do you feel is the state of the economy? How good a shape is it? We're hearing about this 8% growth rate. If you look at the last 3 years on average, although there was a rebound from the pandemic period, of course, at the start of that. What do you think is the state of the economy right now?
Thank you. The state of the economy is pretty healthy. I mean, I think it is now we have consolidated the recovery from the pandemic. Now it's about consolidating the recovery into consolidating the growth and sustaining it over a long period. And as I mentioned in the last year's full economic survey, the fact that we have very good balance sheets in the banking system and the corporate system on the back of public sector investments, capex, by the union government and state governments crowding in the private sector. So all these things augur well for the economy. But now, in the last several years, of course, pre-pandemic and during pandemic, India's job creation machinery got disrupted by the temporary shocks. One was the balance sheet shock in the second decade, followed by the pandemic. I think now the private sector is beginning to create jobs. The real estate sector is doing well. Construction jobs are being created. So I think we will see, therefore, in the coming years, consumption growth also picking up, and that would make the recovery, that would make economic growth even more, even stronger. So in that sense, the state of the economy continues to be good, and we remain upbeat on its prospects in the coming years as well.
So if you look at what we should consider, what is it that we should be expecting is the track of the Indian economy in the next 2 or 3 years? As I said, it was just after the pandemic, there was a jump, of course, from there, and then it's about being 7%, 8% is a forecast for 6.5%. What do you think is the steady state growth of the Indian economy that we should be expecting? Is it 6%? Is it 7%? Should we be ambitious for higher than that?
No, the steady state growth of the economy is closer to 7%, and that is possible. In fact, a number that is higher than 7% is possible if we are able to undertake granular reforms of the type that the survey points out illustratively, of course. Yeah.
I'm going to come in great length and discuss some of those reforms and discuss the measures, because the thrust of the economic survey seems to be that a lot of work has been done. A lot of work has been done on infrastructure and setting the stage right. As you correctly said, fixing the balance sheets of the banks. A lot of that work has been done. But of course, you can never rest on your laurels. There's still a lot of work to be done if you want to keep on pushing it to 8% and above growth rate, that is.
So I think you have summed it up quite well. That's exactly what the survey aims to convey. I think we have come a long way. That is why our per capita income, even in dollar terms, has grown by about 7 times in the last 30 years. And therefore, we have come from $348 per capita to about $2,500 per capita in the last 30 years or so. And that wouldn't have happened but for the liberalization, ease of doing business, and the investment in physical infrastructure, digital public infrastructure, etc., that this government has undertaken over the last 10 years. And the important thing is to, now that the global environment is changing, not necessarily for the better. Therefore, to be able to move from here on, from $2,500 to $10,000 per capita, we need to focus a lot more on domestic drivers of growth, and that requires getting down into the plumbing of governance, which means identifying areas where even now the heavy hand of the government is sort of bearing down on businesses, especially small and medium ones, and lifting them so that they can become important growth engines. And that is a job not just of the union government, but in fact, predominantly of the state and local governments. And that is what the survey points out. Apart from mentioning that agriculture can also be a big engine of growth, especially if we let the farmers enjoy the fruits and the signals from the market. And the survey also points out what else we can do in the manufacturing space to be able to create jobs. So I think the the answer lies in refocusing on agriculture. We have done the Green Revolution. Now it is time for Green Revolution 2.0. In terms of manufacturing, if we continue to boost SME sector and removing the regulatory burdens on them, then we will create more jobs. And also with respect to education and skilling, we need a better partnership between academia and the private sector as well. So like this, there are multiple ideas as to how to sustain the growth rate of 7% or even exceed that in the coming years.
So,
back to you.
As I go into each of those in some detail, let's just spend a couple of minutes on the global environment. And the economic survey does say that the environment is not as benign as it was, for example, in the period when China really had that big rise. The environment is not that benign. And two or three specific things you spoke about, which are maybe more short term. There's a high interest rate scenario across the world. There are wars obviously taking place. There could be policies that we can't do much about. So there are some things which are in our hands, like uncertainties around tax and duties, which you did refer to, but there are other things that are not in our hands.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, I think we continue to focus on what we need to do because the final outcomes are subject to even external factors beyond our control. Whether it is a pandemic, natural calamity, or global growth slowing down, etc., and some conflict somewhere affecting investor sentiments, etc. So all these things are beyond our control. But as long as we continue to plug away, eventually the results will come through. And that is why over a longish period, over the last 30 years, we have been able to make progress, and global factors might have impeded the growth performance in specific year or years. But by and large, if we continue to plug away at facilitating economic activity in the country, then eventually the results will come. And that is exactly what the purpose of that is exactly the message of the economic survey. But of course, there are some important decisions to be taken given the fact that we have to undertake climate energy transition as well, which was not a constraint for other economies. Right. So in that sense, our challenge is probably arguably harder than what other countries faced. And also our own challenge is going to be harder than what it was when we could move from $348 per capita to $2,500 per capita. That in that period, global environment was relatively smoother. Therefore, to be able to grow from here to $10,000 in a much more difficult global environment and on top of the climate change energy transition agenda requires us to pull all possible levers. And one of the most important levers is deregulation. Second is reimagining agriculture. And third is enabling the small and medium enterprise sector to grow. And fourth is to create employment through services like tourism, care economy, etc. So there are multiple levers and multiple stakeholders have to come together, and that is the survey's aim.
Right. And before I come to those levers, just staying with the global environment, the survey does talk about China. It does talk about China +1, because while you can say that the global environment is not as conducive as it once was, there are some people who will argue that India also has an opportunity as the rest of the world starts to worry about what's happening with China and Taiwan, wants to de-risk and move away from China. That's where India potentially has a massive opportunity, and that's one of the areas that we seem to be also trying to get into, shifting electronics or other things to India. China +1, we should be the +1, it should be the theory.
It is an opportunity, and that is what India's PLI programs are aiming to do. At the same time, of course, some of these things require us to also create the ecosystem within the country. For some of the larger investors, require their Chinese ecosystem as well to move. And that's exactly what India has to figure out. And that is why we talked about the right balance between importing capital and importing goods from China. So in some sense, yes, China +1 still remains an opportunity for India. And that requires us also to make some more adjustments to the way we engage with China.
So that, of course, has been a...
We have to go because the next interview is due as well. Sorry about that.
All right. Well, one last question then, if I could ask you on what the government has been saying about reducing compliance. You were referring to it also briefly right now. You quoted the Isha Upanishad in the economic survey saying that that's a really important thing. Reduce the burden of compliance so that small enterprises and others can do much better.
Yeah, that is absolutely. In fact, that is not, again, I would stress, it is not just something that we talk about with respect to the union government, but it is much more important in the case of state and local governments.
All right. One last question, if I can. Agriculture, any thoughts that you have on how you can fix that? And unemployment, which is the other major problem that many would say that the Indian economy is facing right now.
Yeah, the survey does give some ideas. And as I said, as I mentioned repeatedly, deregulation is one of the ways in which we are going to enhance the management and resource bandwidth of our businesses to be able to take on more labor and create jobs.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Nageswaran. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
To watch more programs of Sansad TV, subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and share them.